This is the city of Jerusalem, also referred to as Zion in the Old Testament and Al-Quds by Arabic speakers. Within this city lies a trapezium-shaped platform. This platform occupies only 37 acres, but despite its small size, it holds extreme significance for all three Abrahamic faiths. Let's take a closer look at the Temple Mount.
Why can't we share this building? And not even share it in the sense of like it's only a mosque or it's only a synagogue, but rather something that is equally both. Because in the end of the day, it's the same God that we're praying to, and it's the
Right.
same connection we have to the land. Um,
Yeah.
and this mountain means something. This like place means something, and it means something for both of us. We have a lot of the same prophets. We have a lot of the same stories. We have a lot of the same culture.
As I tend to do with all of my videos on Abrahamic cross study, I like to start with Jewish history because it appears first on our timeline. In the book of Exodus, the Israelites begin their journey out of Egypt after being delivered from the hands of the Pharaoh with the help of God and the 10 plagues. During the journey, Moses was called to Mount Sinai on several occasions. It was on this mountain that Moses would receive many divine revelations that would form the foundation of the Mosaic Law. All the way through chapter 23 of the book of Exodus, we see numerous examples of the type of guidelines that the God of Israel commanded. Now, a big part of the Old Testament that is often the cause of general discomfort is the use of animal sacrifice. Animal sacrifice, along with sacrifice of other commodities, played a key role in the development of the Jews. There's a couple notes I want to make here. While this may seem barbaric through a modern set of eyes, this was actually quite tame when you can look at the contemporaries of the ancient Jews. Pagans were sacrificing humans, as well as even their own infants. In a way, the sacrificial rituals commanded in Exodus were actually quite tame, and when put into context, were a viable remedy to some of the extremist practices that were already solidified. As a Christian, do you think that Christians should have more of an interest in these sites, or do you think that it's not necessary?
I think ideally you see this more in Catholicism and even more in Eastern Orthodoxy. Everything that we believe and everything that we do has a biblical source to it. St. Jerome said that ignorance of Scripture is ignorance of Christ. And so the deeper we know the Scriptures, we come to an understanding that Christianity is based on Judaism without a doubt. We need to have more of an emphasis on not so much following the Jewish religion itself, but rather understanding the context of the times of Jesus.
Because the book of Exodus commanded animal sacrifice, there became an equal necessity for a place dedicated to conduct said sacrifices. While traveling in the desert for 40 years, the Jews obviously couldn't construct a permanent house of worship, and so they didn't. Moses received instruction on Mount Sinai to construct a temporary house. The English word for this structure is the tabernacle, but this word doesn't really do it justice considering it is derived from the Latin word tabernaculum, which is related to a ritualistic building in ancient Roman religion. The Hebrew term for this structure, mishkan, holds closer to its true purpose. The word roughly translates to dwell, a fitting name considering God commands Moses, "Have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will dwell among them." Not only was this now the perfect place for sacrifice, it also gave the Israelites the privilege of being graced with the presence of their God. In a way, it served as a great test to their faith, in which they horribly failed, but we'll get into that a little bit later. This temporary structure had a very specific blueprint. If you've read through this, like I have, it gets very boring very fast. But this elaboration makes a lot of sense considering it was the first established place of worship for their God. God's presence was so powerful in this house that regular people were not allowed to even enter it. If one was to make an offering for atonement, the priest would make it on their behalf. They would leave it somewhere outside of the tabernacle. Furthermore, the Mishkan or tabernacle became an essential means of passage for the Israelites into the Promised Land. In Exodus chapter 40, the glory of the Lord is described filling out the place, manifesting in the form of a cloud. When this cloud was present, the Israelites knew to stay put, and when it was lifted, they continued on with their travels. So now that we understand why a place of worship became necessary, we can fast forward to the first permanent structure, built under the rule of one of the most influential Abrahamic figures, King Solomon. King Solomon was the heir to God's covenant with his father, King David. You see, King David had badly wanted to build the first temple. He's quoted saying, "Here I am living in a place of cedar while the ark of God remains in a tent." And so here he is talking about the Ark of the Covenant. God was no doubt pleased with David's desire to honor him, but he had an issue with David constructing the temple due to his position as a king who waged war and shed the blood of thousands. God found it appropriate that instead a man of peace would build the temple, and so he promised David that his son would be that man. Under the authority of Solomon, David's wishes would come to fruition. It is projected that the first temple was completed somewhere around 957 BC. The site of the first temple is believed to be both where God created the first man, Adam, and also where Abraham was to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. Notice that earlier in the video, I said that Muslims celebrate Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son Ishmael annually. This is an important discrepancy to highlight. While Jews and Christians generally agree that Isaac was the one who was sacrificed, Muslims instead believe it was Ishmael. Regardless of whether it was Isaac or Ishmael that was to be sacrificed, we can already see how the soil alone at this site is very important to all Abrahamis.
Al Jazeera recently reported Jews storming the Al-Aqsa Mosque and conducting what they deem Talmudic rituals. So I've heard the kind of excuse for this behavior as Jews are just fed up with not having access to pray on the compound like they should. You know, there is the belief that a mosque is open to both Jews and Muslims. The Temple Mount compound is unique in the fact that Jews are not allowed to do that, while still acknowledging the fact that the forced entry into the compound is not right. Would you say that that motive makes sense, or would you say because of the political issues, it's not really fair to even say that?
What they did, or what they say so-called Talmudic rituals that they were doing, it was not Talmudic. We've seen the videos online. I believe that some of the people who pose themselves as Jews really don't even know the true meaning of Judaism. It's basically extremism to its core. If at all they feel that they're doing something spiritual, they aren't, because it didn't look like it was spiritual, or based on what I've seen from a few Jewish activities and rituals that I've seen come to personally. The basis of all religion is you do not mock. You do not mock another religion, one. The second thing, you do not create any kind of so-called ritual, especially when you know that that is a place of worship of another Abrahamic religion.
Just a short time after the completion of the first temple, the morale of the Jews reached an all-time low, and they veered so far away from their faith that God allowed the temple to be destroyed and captured by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Just 100 years prior to King Nebuchadnezzar invading Judah and capturing the temple, the northern kingdom of Israel was invaded by the Assyrians, and they took 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel into captivity as well. These are known as the lost tribes of Israel. The destruction of Solomon's temple served as an ultimate symbol of the ignominious state of the Jews. The temple was the only reminder left of a man who had truly done God's people justice, who possessed an extremely valuable bank of wisdom that echoed on for generations. To see the temple fall was a major wake-up call, to say the least. Thankfully, though, the Jews didn't have to sulk in their defeat for too long, because about 70 years later, King Cyrus of Persia conquered Babylonia and granted the Israelites safe access back into their promised land. Construction of a much smaller temple would then begin construction in around the 5th century BC. And it didn't have to be very impressive, because at this point the Jews were really just trying to regain their identity. Problems would start to rise again with King Herod the Great, a Roman Jewish client king of Judea. In the 1st century BC, he would dramatically refurbish the temple, along with extending the platform beneath the temple, known as the Temple Mount today. The building out of the temple platform was problematic for many reasons, best magnified by the court of the Gentiles. This was the outer area of the temple where Jesus led the majority of his public teachings. The courtyard became less and less reminiscent of a holy place and more like a glamorized flea market. Here, vendors sold sacrificial animals, various material goods, and even souvenirs. The most controversial business that took place here, though, by far, was the act of money changing. During the latter half of the Second Temple period, the Romans occupied the land, and so Jews conducted business solely using Roman currency. This created an issue because the Torah gives a strict order. All sons of Israel are required to offer half a shekel as a contribution to the Lord. This was a recurring temple tax, and it was unavoidable. With golden shekels no longer in circulation, how were Jews to properly observe this law? This is where the money changers came in. The temple had a reserve amount of shekels stored away for anyone who was to make a contribution to the temple. Whenever someone wanted to do this, they would exchange their currency for the shekels, which that they would immediately donate back to the temple, and the money changers would charge a conversion fee and pocket the difference, therefore creating a massive flow of income for providing absolutely no value. We don't need much explanation to understand why this upset Jesus so much. There are many famous paintings that depict Jesus casting these money changers out of the temple. Shortly after the death of Christ, the second temple was also destroyed, but this time by the Romans. As to why God allowed the temple to be destroyed not one, but 2 times, it can be only explained by the Jews' continuously obstinate behavior. The only remnant of the second temple that has been preserved to this day is the Western Wall, allegedly. There is some debate surrounding this idea. The former Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Ikrima Sabri, echoes the voice of many Muslims when he says, "There was never a Jewish temple on Al-Aqsa, and there is no proof that there ever was a temple. Allah is fair. He would not agree to make Al-Aqsa if there were a temple there for others beforehand."
And like you pointed out about like the saying that like, oh, they don't have a right to their land, they have no connection to Al-Aqsa. We know that to not be true because even the Prophet Muhammad, he prayed towards Jerusalem in the beginning. The reason why he did it there was because it means something for both of us. I see it in a lot of like Muslim sources. They will try to demean the Jewish connection to the Temple Mount and say, oh, we actually don't know this. We actually don't have any evidence for that. We actually have, you have no reason to be here whatsoever. And I think when you tell that to people, you're actually like saying, hey, I don't care about your history. I don't care about your culture. I don't care about your religion. This will be the equivalent of the Crusaders taking over Mecca and telling the Muslim people, why are you even here? What do you want to do here?
But why do Muslims have interest in this compound anyway? Like we discussed earlier, the soil itself is very important due to its history with the Prophet Abraham, with their Prophet Adam. On top of this though, Islam's Prophet Muhammad has strong ties to Al-Aqsa as well.
He went on Al-Barak, he went to the Temple Mount, he went on the stone and saw the seven levels of heaven.
This is known as the Night Journey, in which Muhammad was contacted by Adam, John the Baptist, Jesus, Joseph, Idris, Aaron, Moses, and Abraham. Finally, he made direct contact with Allah, and it is here that Muhammad negotiated the 5 daily prayers, among other things. Muslims project the night journey to have taken place just a decade before the Prophet's death.
Do you think that those claims have any basis that the Dome of the Rock is not where the Prophet Muhammad ascended? Do you believe that Jews could be right in the fact that it has no ties to Muslims and it could just be where Adam was created and where, what do you think about that?
To me, I don't really, as a Christian, I don't believe any stories about Muhammad.
Okay.
I don't think, it's possible he maybe made a pilgrimage there in his lifetime. But from what I know, and even the sources, the Islamic sources aren't really clear. It's not in the Quran. It wasn't something that was said during the Prophet's lifetime. I just don't think, it was a real event. In my opinion, as a Christian,
Okay.
obviously Muslims will disagree on that. One of my biggest issues with Islam is there are some scholars that say that this isn't even where the temple was or the Temple of Solomon was. I've seen a few Muslims say that, which to me is just mind-boggling because history, it's pretty clear that this was the spot where the temple
Right.
was.
And so that's a thing that's on both sides though, which is pretty interesting. You have, the same way that you're uncomfortable with them saying that the temple never existed there. That's the same way that Muslims are uncomfortable with the idea of Jews and Christians saying that the Dome of the Rock is not where Muhammad was. You know what I mean? So it's kind of a two-sided coin.
Yeah.
It's kind of, that's the other perspective. It's like they can't believe that you would believe that Muhammad wasn't there and Muhammad didn't do this, Muhammad didn't do that. So it's an interesting issue.
Understandable.
When Muslim forces conquered Jerusalem just under a century later, they built a shrine around this area in which he ascended, known as the Dome of the Rock. And this shrine still stands today, and it has since been ornamented by golden plates. Rabbinical sages claim that the stone that lies inside the structure has no relation to the Prophet, but it does connect to the origins of humanity. Some Jews have even pushed to conduct excavations underneath the Dome of the Rock in an attempt to uncover remnants of the Second Temple. This has understandably created tension between the two belief systems.
Do you believe that there is remnants of the Second Temple that haven't been discovered? What's your stance on that?
I think to believe that there is no basically artifacts, ancient artifacts underneath the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, that would be a little bit silly. Just because we know there is, historically speaking. However, I don't think this should encourage destruction of an existing building. Even if we find reminiscences of the second temple there, or even the first temple, or even before that, this shouldn't be an excuse for destruction.
If they excavate it, we will be losing something that's already there. Us being human beings, we're very curious and we want to know exactly what's been happening. You are a person who's doing your own research and studies, right? So similarly, there's a lot of people out there who want to see exactly whether there was a temple or not, keeping in mind they already found artifacts. I'm not saying no. But there have been situations where, if I have to even mention India for that matter, where you had the Babri Masjid, one of the persons basically went and placed idols down there. And using just those idols, they claim that there was a temple below and they demolished the Babri Masjid. Do we want to do the same thing here? That's the biggest question.
Today, the temple is controlled by the Jerusalem Waqf, an Islamic religious trust. It has been this way since 1948, only briefly being under Israeli control after the War of 1967, which control was then relinquished only a few hours later. This compound personifies the beauty of Abrahamic lore, while in the same breath provides us with many of the geopolitical and social dilemmas that have threatened peace in the region for almost an entire century. As we move into the future, we can only pray that one day the people of the book may once again find unity. Thank you for watching this video. If you would like to support me, you can do so by clicking the Patreon at the first link in the description. I hope to welcome you back next time.